Hello there. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about using some mesh objects that are available in Fluid Designer for 3D printing that you can use to create your own personalised pendant. There are not very many of these objects, but you have to work with them, in quite a different way from working with curves. So if you start Fluid Designer up, you need to go to the Pendants folder first of all, and if I just scroll down, the objects that I'm talking about are these ones that are in white, as you can see here. So there's a whole series of A to Z ones, and I'll come back and I'll look at the A in a few minutes. And if we scroll further down, there are a few other objects, say not very many, but there are a few. So if I drag and drop this Catalan curve pendant onto the workspace there, this is the object that we get. Now, although it's called a Catalan curve pendant, and the original shape of this object was created using a Catalan curve, the object has actually been changed from a curve to a mesh. And we can see that if we look in the outliner window here, you can see this triangle. That indicates that it's a mesh, not a curve. And also in the properties panel, there is no curve icon that we can select. There's a modifiers, and there's a main information icon, so we can see what the size of this object is. It's about 27 millimeters across, and it's about 3 millimeters deep. And as you can see, it's got a pattern to it. Now, over in the help panel here, there are instructions on how you can actually create this, and it's actually created using a mesh, but it's created using equations, parametric equations, these ones that are shown here. Now, I'm not going to go through that in this instance. All I'm really going to do is show you how you can change this and make different types of pendant. Well, if you go to the modifiers panel, one of the panels, the Decimate panel, is open for you. Now, I wouldn't really advise you changing the parameters in wireframe and subsurf, or even the second Decimate. I would stick to perhaps just modifying this value here, the Decimate Ratio. Now, if I click in this bar to the left here and click with the left mouse button and just drag it all the way to the right, that's actually what the default pattern looks like. So there's no decimate there. So we've got a face count of 900 for this object. Now if I press the tab key and go into edit mode, you can see that's actually what the raw object looks like. So it's a very thin shell. In itself wouldn't print without the fact that we've put some thickness to it using this wireframe modifier. So there's a thin shell, and by adding these modifiers we give it some thickness and we smooth it off. But we use the decimate ratio to reduce the number of faces. Now you can't see that in edit mode, you can only see it when we return to the normal mode. So you can see the face count has gone down to 494. Let me just put it back to its maximum, so 900. So you can drag this ratio here and change the pattern. Now, having said that, if we zoom into the middle here, if we try measuring some of these holes, that's 0.2 of a millimeter. You won't see that hole if you print it in most 3D printing systems. It's too small, so that would actually get filled in. So the holes on the outside here, that's no problem, that's nearly 2 millimeters. So you'll see the patterns on the outside. You might lose some of the detail on the middle here. So that's a consideration you've got to make in terms of what the final object is really going to look like. Now, we could edit this a little bit further. If I go into press the tab key on the keyboard and go into edit mode, and if I press the A key on the keyboard to deselect all those points there, I could go in here and I could highlight the vertices, and if I press X on the keyboard I could delete that vertices and create a hole like that, and I'll delete the next vertices as well. So when I press the tab key to come out of edit mode, you can see I've changed my pattern here. I've actually created this big hole, not using decimate ratio. I'll just switch that back up to 100 again, but by deleting some of the faces there, or deleting vertices, which deletes the faces. So you can modify the pattern using the ratio up here, but you can also go in to edit mode and modify the pattern as well. Now over here I deleted some vertices. Here if I press X on the keyboard, if I dissolve the vertices, notice those faces don't disappear. Dissolve the vertices, dissolve the vertices. But when I go into edit mode, you can see that the pattern has changed from what it was before. If I do Control Z to undo that, that was the pattern before I dissolved the vertices. If I redo it, you can see you've got a bigger hole here, and the pattern changes. Now, as well as deleting and dissolving vertices, we could in fact move them. Now, it's a good idea not to move them up or down. It's a good idea to actually slide them, and we can do that by if we do Control V, so it's the vertices that I've selected, and if you do Control V you get the vertices menu, and you can select the slide option, and you can see I can slide that vertices to there, for example, and if I do Control V again, I can slide the vertices on that side as well, and again that will modify the pattern. So you can play around deleting, dissolving, sliding. You can also, if you do Control V, you can merge selected vertices. I've only got one selected at the moment, but I mean if I select 2, 3, if I do Control V, I can merge them. I can merge them at the center, at the last, at the first point. So they merge into the first point, and again that will change the appearance, the pattern that you can do with the pattern for the pendant there. Okay, so there are a variety of ways in which you can play around with this particular object to come up with a different style of pendant. Now, you do need to apply these modifiers before it can be 3D printed, but remember, if you just go to File and Export and Wavefront Object, it will apply the modifiers for you and confirm the appearance of the object. Now I'm not actually going to save this particular one. Okay, so that's some of the things that you can do with that. But there is another issue that you've got to be very careful of with these sorts of objects, and that is how thin some of these stems are. Well, if I look there, that's actually only 0.3 of a millimeter thick, just under 0.4 actually. So that won't 3D print. So if I created an OBJ file of this and sent it to Shapeways, it would get rejected. So with these objects you do need to look around and see what the thickness of the object is. Now down in the help panel here there's usually a little bit of information telling you how you can thicken this up and make it 3D printable. And essentially what you've got to do is to convert it to a mesh first of all. So the modifiers get applied, and if we go into edit mode now, you'll see we don't see that thin shell anymore. We see a mesh made up of all the object. Okay, so the thin shell, the Catalan curved shell, has disappeared, and we've actually got the entire finished object here now. And what we need to do is we need to thicken up this object to make it 3D printable. So if I press the A key on the keyboard to select all of it, and as I say, down in the help panel here it tells you what to do. If we do Alt and S, so if I hold down the Alt key and press the S key, I can shrink or fatten the object, and if you look in the toolbar at the top there, it says shrink or fatten 0.0000 linear, even thickness is off. Well, what I need to do is to type in a value to thicken this up. Now in the help window it tells you to type in 0.25. Well, if I type 0.25, if we look on the help menu, you see it's entered that value 0.25, but it says equals 0.00025 millimeters. Well, that's actually too small. That's not the value I want. So rather than 0.25, I'm going to enter in 250. And notice that 250 equals 0.25. Sometimes when you're doing this procedure, Alt and S to shrink or fatten up, and fatten up in this case the object, sometimes when you enter 0.25, that's what you'll get. Look in the menus there and in the toolbar menu and just observe what's happening. If you don't get equals 0.25, try changing it to 250. Okay, and that will, as you can see, thicken up the object. I'll just delete the 250, taking it back down to its original size there, and if I type the 250 back in, you'll see it thickens it up. So the bigger this number, so if I type 500 for example, it goes even thicker. Now clearly when you're doing this, you are going to lose some of the detail in your object. Some of the holes will no longer be holes when you thicken it up, but that's something you have to live with, because you've got to make this object thick enough to be 3D printable. So I've entered 250 there, and I've pressed the enter key, and if I press the tab key to come out of edit mode, that should now print. Now you can see I've lost the gap here, but I've thickened up this web. And if I measure it now, well, I mean, it shouldn't be any problem now. It's up to 0.9 of a millimeter, which will 3D print. So have a look in the help panel here as to what thickness to apply to get your final object. Okay, so that's the Catalan curve one. If I just quickly go to File and New and Reload Startup, I'll just open up one of the other objects that are mesh objects. So I'm going to open up this alphabet object here, this letter A. And this is constructed in a similar sort of way to the other one. It's not actually a mathematical function. But it does use this wireframe, this solidify, and this subsurf thing here. Now notice there isn't a decimate applied to this, but again, over in the help panel here, it tells you to use Alt S and 0.3 to thicken this up. Again, this object is not thick enough on its own to 3D print, so you do need to thicken it up if you maintain it as it is at the moment. But what you can do with this object is you could go into edit mode, and if I select that point there, and if this time if I do drag it up, and if I also select the one behind it, and if I do drag that point up as well. Now this object, it is quite complicated if you zoom in and look at it in detail. It's really quite a strange object, this. It's been created for you in a special sort of way. But you can see that there are no holes in this object at the moment, but when we go out of edit mode, I didn't switch on the screencast keys there, when we press the tab key to come out of edit mode, notice all the holes appear, and that's because of these modifiers. But what I've done there is I've just pulled that up to create a hole here where I could put a chain through if I wanted this to be a pendant. But again, let me just remind you that if you want to 3D print this object, you do need to go to Tools, Object Tools, and convert it to a mesh. And when we press the tab key this time, you'll see that it looks quite different now. It is a confirmed mesh now. The modifiers have been applied. And if we press the A key on the keyboard to select all of it, and we want to thicken this up again, so if I do Alt and S, and it says 0.3, well, if I try 0.3 first of all, as you can see, if you look at the top of the screen there, in the toolbar panel there, it says shrink fatten 0.3 equals 0.0003. Well, that's not what I want, so just delete the 0.3 in the brackets there and type 300 instead, and that says equals 0.3. And you can see, if you just delete the 300 again, you'll see that the model thins down. When you enter in 300, that thickens it up. So typically you find with these objects that 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 will thicken them up to give you a printable object. It's not that straightforward, because obviously there are a lot of different elements to this, and all of them have got to be 3D printable, all of them have got to be thick enough, but the help panel over here hopefully will make life easy for you if you want to actually create one of these objects. Use this thickness over here. Okay, so that could be exported as an OBJ file, run through NetFab, and it should be okay. It should be 3D printable. Now it's been thickened up. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of this particular video on mesh objects in Fluid Designer for 3D printing. Thank you.